third pillar is know what to say, right? Become a master messenger. And I always thought that back in the day, we spent so much time, money, and energy doing all the front end work, getting all these meetings and everything. And then you go to Cincinnati and it costs you $2,000 and you get there and then you walk out of the meeting and the person's like, yeah, I have no idea what they do, right? Which happens more often than not. They're not, right? So the point of this is pitching is as much art as it is science. You know what I mean? It really is. And then preparation, and then really deeply understanding what someone wants to hear. That to me is when you're thinking about being in a meeting just like this in a conference room across from a due diligence analyst. It's so much more, it's a combination of art and science, preparation, and then really thinking through and knowing what the person wants to hear out of your mouth. So do you guys want to just dive in a little bit? And you want to just talk about how you personally think about when you're going in to pitch and sort of the elements that you put into place?
Yeah, I think it's, you want the conversation to be interactive. That's usually the sign of a good meeting with either ourselves or portfolio managers' engagement. But I think the most important thing is creating this idea of centering the meeting. What are we here to talk about, and de-risking the conversation, meaning establishing credibility of the firm, the people, the process that are going to be questions they're going to have to get to at some point in the meeting. The quicker you can get those and address those on the front end, get those off the table, the meeting can become much more productive into the meat of the story. Why are you differentiated? What you do, what problem are you solving for?
And that's it right there, because you want that across the table to start thinking about how is it that I can utilize you into my portfolio, right? So the better that you can get to that point early, the more they're starting to think about how can I incorporate this strategy into my client's asset allocation programs, right? Because then everything thereafter is about differentiating the portfolio, defining the role of the strategy. But if you don't center that conversation early enough, you've lost it, right? You haven't painted them the picture of where you fit in a client portfolio.
Well, Dan, just delve a little bit deeper on that, because there's so many key elements here. Walk us through the importance of being able to take all the basic questions that they have off the table in the first 2 minutes.
Yeah. So those basic questions being who you are and what you do.
Right.
And it's amazing how many people will just glance over that and just assume, again, talk about assumptions, that like we live it every day. We market these strategies. We're very close to the portfolio managers. We look at it on a daily basis. The person on the other end of the table doesn't.
Right.
They've got hundreds of emails that come through. They're tracking hundreds of different strategies. You have to remind them, or introductory standpoint, you have to tell them who it is that you are and what it is that you do. So I work with XYZ firm. We're based in New York City. We have X under management. We have one strategy. The strategy is a large cap growth strategy, right? You want to make sure that you're hitting on those key points. So again, to Andrew's point, was centering the conversation so they can focus on what then is going to come after.
Yeah. So if you were selling your house, okay, and people couldn't see pictures of it to verify what you're saying, are you going to say, it's a dump, it's this, it's that, it's or are you going to tell the people exactly what they want to hear, right? That's the point. You want to tell your prospective buyer exactly what they want to hear. And if you've been in the investment business long enough, you know exactly what they want to hear, right? And so you want to until they can verify it, right? If we weren't on a Zoom call, I was on a conference call, and I'm 18 and being recruited, and I said, hey, you know what, I'm 6'4", got XYZ vertical leaf, I can do this, I can do that, until they actually, I'm interested. That's exactly what I'm looking for, right? But that takes preparation and practice, because it's done. Can you just talk about, like, with the level of intent, Tim, that you do that with?
Yeah.
Because that takes a lot of intent. That just doesn't fall off the turnip truck. You know what I mean? Like, you got to do it with intent, because you got to think through, and you got to be able to anticipate all the questions that they want answers to.
Because a lot of what takes place in that meeting, right? You could be saying something that is the most important thing in your mind, but you have to understand what is important to them, right? If they're an RAA, it's different than a consultant, right? Because of the end channel or the end buyer. But in a 45-minute to an hour-long meeting, what could they actually take away that they will remember? Right? It's probably 4 or 5 key points. And when you cover a lot of information in that meeting, right, recapping it at the end, here's what is most important about our large cap growth manager and why you should care. performance expectations is a big one, right? Periods in which the strategy does well or maybe doesn't do as well. Also, importantly, is what will the experience of investing in the firm and strategy feel like, right? Getting the win is one thing, but client service and keeping the money around is even more important, right? So do you do quarterly webinars? Do you do monthly commentary? Do the PMs do one-on-one direct calls with you as a client? Will we come out and meet with your underlying clients, right? That client experience is important for them, especially as an RIA, because that's marketing for them.
What's the difference between doing a meeting as a salesperson with a due diligence analyst versus doing a meeting with a PM and a due diligence analyst? How do you, like, what are some of the pros and cons or the advantages, disadvantages?
There's certain things that you can say about a portfolio manager and the firm in a one-on-one setting with a due diligence analyst that you can't necessarily say with a portfolio manager.
That's huge, though. It's
huge.
Huge.
It's huge.
Because everyone's like, do you always want to travel the PM? Well, sometimes no.
Right. Yeah.
Because I really want to be able to say certain things that would be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know, because you can brag on them, you can do certain things and provide
It's all fact-based.
Oh, yeah, of course.
All very much rooted in establishing them as highly professional, world-class investors. But to your point, you don't want to brag about them with them in the room. Certain things that you can say in either witnessing an investment meeting and sitting around the table with them and talking to them one-on-one and talking about the client experience, to Tim's point, right? It's saying, you know, the levels of access and transparency that they provide, not only during their due diligence, but after, and then that due diligence that they're going to do on you and maintaining a position in the strategy. You know, those are all things that we can say as investment sales professionals that you don't necessarily want to say in front of the portfolio manager.
Like culture, we talk a lot about Edgewood and culture.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's hard to sit there with Alan in the room or Larry in the room talking about how amazing their culture is, because then you can cite specific things that you've seen over time that really is meaningful.
Well, you can also use the opportunity to reference sell, meaning you can say, this is what our long-term clients have really gravitated to as in part of the Edgewood process, or taking the bias out of their investment decisions because they use a team approach, but highlighting what other investors have grabbed onto. If you know that's a really important part of the process, they'll take that pretty seriously and might want to dig in further on that.
And the reference sale is huge.
Yeah.
That's a big value add that we can bring as the investment sales professional in preparing for that meeting, is knowing how others in that seat use the strategy that we're representing, right? Because again, now you're drawing connections to their peers, you're drawing connections back to their portfolio, where it makes it real for them and how they can implement that strategy.
Yeah, because a lot of the folks that we're calling on, and everyone is calling on, already has an allocation to that asset class. If they are an Apple buyer, that we're selling the Apple, right? But through your line of questioning, you can get an understanding of who they currently use if they don't tell you, right? What is it, an active manager, or is it more concentrated, higher active share, higher tracking share? How would our large growth manager complement that, right? What would that blended portfolio expectation look like? And now you're helping them think about, okay, if I add exposure, here's where it's a little bit different, right? And putting yourself in their seat to some degree. And back to your question about what you can say in a meeting with a PM, I think you can be much more direct at the end of a meeting with a PM on the next step, right? Because the PM just, in the analyst note, they just traveled there to that city. They spend an hour with you. Is there a real opportunity for us to work together, right? Will you be doing a search in the next 6 to 9 months or whatever it is?
Yeah.
And what
nice to those two questions more specifically, but yeah.
I like about that, right, is now the PM doesn't ask me that question, right? That question has been answered in the meeting, because I'd be guessing if I don't ask.
So Ryan, talk to us about what it means to have a PM with you, and then how would you feel your role is in that face-to-face meeting with the PM?
Yeah, obviously it's great to travel with a PM and get in front of any pool of capital. And really in those meetings, your job is to play mediator. You want to set the table, right? Back to Tim's point, what's important to the allocator, right? And I think salespeople, you have to be a great listener and understand what's important to them. So with the portfolio manager, one, you want to prep the portfolio manager. This is the allocator. This is what's important to them. This is what you want to spend time on. But at the start of the meeting, you want to set the meeting, who you are, to Dan's point, the same thing you would do if you were by yourself, what the asset class is, where this would fit in their portfolio, introduce the PM if they've never talked to them, here's their experience, some history, and then turn the meeting over to that allocator. What's most important for us to call? You might already know that, but it's always nice to put that into their hands so that they can navigate the meeting. And then really you want to play kind of mediator.
I mean, that's a very important part of being in sales role is when they're going on too long, how do you interject to get it back into a conversation versus a monologue?
Yeah, it can be a little uncomfortable cutting off a PM when they are on these tangents, right? Sometimes you could do little cues before the meeting, like, hey, if I slide a deck in front of you, please stop talking.
That's very true.
But you have to sometimes, they're like, oh, okay, sorry.
And coaching ahead.
Coaching, that's not being critical. Sometimes you get into the meeting and you just get going.
Yeah. And that does show passion, which the allocator does appreciate.
Managers are great analysts.
Yeah.
So they're not doing anything wrong. But that's what I'm saying. We're not there just to carry the bag.
Yeah.
Right. We're there to make sure the meeting stays on track and it's a conversation, right?
But also when an allocator, sometimes they do ask multiple questions within one question, and the PM will go to the most interesting in their mind or the most recently asked, right? So we have to make sure we're writing down what questions were asked and was it covered in the meeting? If not, that's part of the follow-up as well. But just say, hey, you asked about flows or you asked about performance. Let's get back to that.
What about being a great listener, as Ryan was saying? So, but by listening for how the analyst, the due diligence is listening, but also whether you can tell whether they're getting the key takeaways.
Yeah. Well, I think it gets back to preparing before any meeting. I always want to think about what's my objective, like what's our goal in this meeting,
Right.
Because there's different phases of the due diligence cycle. So depending on where we are in that conversation, is this meeting number 1 or is this meeting number 5? And having the notes and going back to what I logged into Salesforce, or knowing about the relationship and where we are, what is my goal or my objective in that meeting? And then preparing by having that listed out, like what a checklist of things that you want to make sure that you cover in that meeting. And so you as the investment sales professional, you can help bring that conversation back to center by getting to one of those points that we want to touch on as a takeaway in that meeting.
How important do you guys think it is to, and following up on what you're saying, to ask about, hey, what concerns you have with this strategy and kind of understanding it, or where do you see the sort of hot button? So where you're uncomfortable.
It's incredibly important. Yeah, you want to address what's on their mind, what those concerns are, and having a portfolio manager in the room to talk about if it's a point of process, if it's about decision making, if it's about the concentration and why they think concentration is important, whatever it may be. You want to get at what is on their mind as a point of concern.
How often do you, for the two, Andrew, how often when you see a PM going and it's not quite, he's missing some of the points, how often do you just basically say, hey, Jim, can you make sure you cover this or cover that? Can you talk about this? Because it's not being said yet, but you know how important it is.
Yeah, correct. And sometimes that's interjecting, or sometimes adding a question to Jim in the meeting with something that's relevant to what he was saying, but he might have
you'll
missed
ask
it.
The question to Jim
And say, it might be helpful to Tim here if you elaborate on this part as well. And that's typically well received by the PM.
Because you also know what the softball ones are, but they can.
Yeah, it can't be a blatant softball, or else you come across a little cheesy. But I think, I think we've all been there where there's a time that you could elaborate on something else that's relevant, and you can pose that question.
Right. That's great. So as we close out, any other thoughts on the meeting? So we're talking about preparation, but number one, getting those 15 to 20 questions off the table. Do you guys remember? I don't want to name names, but we did a call with Spruce, if you will, and the due diligence analyst was asking questions about 20 minutes into the call that he should have never been asking.
Yeah.
That should have been addressed, because it's just wasting time now, right? And I can't stress how important those first 2 to 3 minutes are.
Yeah.
Of taking all of that confusion, you call it getting centering the conversation. That's been one of our big lines. But getting that so the person's like, okay, I know exactly what I'm listening for. Now I can dig into the meat and have a conversation and ask questions to a conversation.
Yeah.
You used the example of a house earlier, selling a house.
Correct.
You wouldn't go talk 20 minutes about the history of the house and who built it. And meanwhile, the buyers are like, how many bedrooms and where's the house, right? So you got to sit with them. It's a 4-bedroom based in this neighborhood, and this is why we like it, right?
So you got to get the basics on the
Exactly.
table immediately.
Exactly.
So to close this out, because it's my favorite part, follow-up. So we get asked this question a lot. How do you follow up? What's the cadence of follow-up? And we can talk about this because I say follow-up happens in the meeting. The follow-up happens in the meeting, right? So you alluded to it, but let's get real specific. Let's use one long-only example of how you close out a meeting and one private fund example to get really specific, because I think this is why we can't say great meeting. Got to give the update.
Yeah.
But most importantly is I need to know where I stand before I leave that room.
Yeah. So getting the answer, do you invest in this asset class? Yes or no, off the table, right? Yes. Ending the meeting with, will you be doing a search in this asset class in the next 9 to 12 months?
So it's long only.
Long
Search,
right? Will you be doing a search? Yes or no? If it's yes, do you believe everything we've covered today and what you know about our long only manager is a fit for that search? You know what, Tim? Yes, plot, and they might search, and that's where you can go back to those rebuttals.
Process follow.
What would this maybe the
And then if they say yes, right, it's like, okay, would it be helpful? What would be those helpful thing to move this forward?
Exactly. And what do you like seeing, and how can we support your due diligence process?
What's your process?
Right. Whether it's a DDQ, a lot of ESG, DE&I, SRI. Do you have a policy there? Yes or no? Just what is it? Can we do performance comparisons with who your existing manager is and do a blended portfolio if you have those tools, right? So a lot of just helping them do their job in the due diligence process and getting those requests in the meeting right then.
So it's a two-part question, though. What you're saying is up front, hey, we've just gone through this whole strategy. Do you see a strategy like this fitting in your portfolio? If it's a no, you know what the follow-up is, right?
Yeah.
Keep on the mailing list and touch base here and there, right? But it's a quick no. If it's yes, do you see yourself doing a search in the next 9 to 12 months?
Yep.
If it's no, you know what the follow-up is. If it's yes, now it's like, okay, just all the items that you just discussed. So because this happened with one of our customers on Marketplace, someone of an esoteric private fund strategy, he asked the question, they said an engaging hour call, our meeting with the PM, the whole 9 yards. And he did our thing. He goes, can you see this type of strategy fitting within your portfolio? He goes, absolutely not. He goes, why'd you just do the hour meeting? He goes, thought it really fascinating. You really get to learn about it. So to your point earlier, right? So, but if it's a yes, right, then it's simply, well, that's great. Do you think you can make our next close or our final close at 12/31/23? You guys can't extend it. Now it's a hard close on December 31st, 23. Okay, we can't make it. The best I can do is 3/31. Now you know where you're standing, right?
Yeah.
And if they say, yes, I can make that close, then you go through the same due diligence follow-up, right? So I think the key takeaway here is the follow-up happens in the meeting and has to. Right now, I've had some people say, well, Guy, what if they do, this or that, and they try to get out of the squirrel out of the question. And I get that, but for the most part, they'll give you a direct answer. Don't you guys find that?
I find they'll be direct because look, it's in the best interest of their own time too.
Right.
And they don't want to waste your time. They certainly don't want to waste their own time. So they're going to let you know as to whether or not it's a fit, as to what the timing potentially could look like. And look, especially in the long only side, it may not be an immediate search, but now this gets back to the pipeline, and now we know where to categorize them. We're not going to say we're going to neglect them for the next 12 months. It just means they're not going to be at the top of the pipeline for us to focus on as an opportunity that they can be more near term to close.
And then you don't come back to the office and have your colleagues and your boss say, hey, how was the meeting with XYZ? And they're like, great meeting. Well, what does that mean? We always say, did they wire money in during the call or commit during the meeting? That is a great meeting. But if they didn't, so asking those two tough questions really is the determinant at the end of the day of you saving a ridiculous amount of time post-meeting.
Yeah.
And then you know what the follow-up is after versus how many people do this? And I know it happens all the time. The meeting ends, they say all these nice things, they walk out, and they email the person, say, hey, just wanted to follow up. Here's some other materials we talked about, and they get ghosted. Right? But how often does that happen? I hear it all the time. That's why when you have them in the meeting, that's when you have to ask the tough question. Because otherwise, now you're chasing something that might not be an opportunity. But people don't like to say no, right? People don't want to say no, right? Public. And no, Andrew, I don't like the strategy. Right. That's fine, but you're asking, right? And then
a big component of it is, especially in, sometimes in the meeting, right, there is a level of nuance where there might not be a surge, but there is a level of interest, right? Kind of the timing on when they're going to do an allocation it's a little hazy, right? But asking the question, especially for an RA, because they have to go tell that story, the analyst, to a committee, to then go tell it to their clients, right? So there's a game of telephone here, right? And in our expectation that analyst and that committee is going to tell what we want them to tell to their clients to be perfect, we can't rely on that, right? So having an understanding of when their next investment committee meeting is, and before that meeting, hey, wanted to recap what we spoke about in your office a week or two ago, and just bullet pointing out the key facts, who we are, what we do, why we do what we do, what we discussed, and why you should care, right? In preparation of your committee meeting, right? So ask them, how often do you meet? Do you meet every other week? Yeah, we meet on Wednesdays. Send the email on Tuesday, right? And so then they can pull it up in their committee meeting, say, wow, this guy helped me do my job.
Yeah, it makes the analyst look good. Also easy to forward along to the rest of the investment committee before you have that conversation.
That's really working smart. Yeah. I love that. That is the definition of working smart. So, you did just bring up a point before we close out this. Let's talk about in the investment committee, they're pitching your strategy potentially to someone else as an alternative, right? How do you guys look at the education you've done to that analyst? So when they're in front of the committee taking career risk, presenting your strategy, how educated have you made them and how much? Because if you tie for first, right, you want the tie to go to us because they just feel more comfortable with our strategy.
Yeah.
Want to comment on that?
Dan could go in a lot of detail around this, but a part of being a good salesperson is being a product specialist, right? And having a full understanding of not only what your strategy does, but what your competition does. So when they say, hey, we use XYZ large cap growth, and it's similar in style, similar exposures, but maybe it's a little more turnover, or maybe they have a little different outlook or bent, right? We can go and look at their holdings and understand where they're allocated versus where we are allocated, right? And that's allowing us to tell the analyst, hey, you're adding a little bit different exposure here, and here's why. You're helping them do their job. Just for us to send over the monthly returns and they crunch the numbers and have them figure it out, right? We're not going to rely on that.
Doesn't rest help.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot more behind the returns.
I think this is the fun of the business, but the part that I love the most is
right.
being that specialist, right? Because we talked about things that we can say in a meeting with an analyst, not having a portfolio manager, but it cuts both ways. There's things an analyst can ask us that they don't want to necessarily ask in front of a portfolio manager. There's a different level of preparation that they have to do before getting in front of a portfolio manager. They don't feel as obligated with us. So we can help fill in all of those gaps, all of those questions that maybe they have that they didn't necessarily want to ask a portfolio manager. So you have to establish yourself as an asset, as a resource. To get it to your point there, Tim, it's in that follow-up that we're providing, can we help them do their job in a way that makes them look strong and have command over the topic or whatever the manager or whatever the strategy may be? What are we providing as a resource to that analyst?
And that's a big part of the follow-up too, is asking the question, where might you be stuck on the strategy? Like, is there one component that you're not 100% confident in that we can help you clarify and be confident in that going into your committee meeting? Just asking the question, where are you stuck on the strategy?